day. We've of course tested our internet connection for the last 30 minutes and it's all been fine, and then it just gave me a warning instantly as we got started here. So hopefully we won't have any problems, but if we do, we'll figure it out. So please though, if you notice any lag or anything like that, let me know so that I can adjust the style accordingly. But I'm very grateful to be here today. It's wonderful to be able to talk with so many people about some of the trends that we've been seeing in the industry from last year and what's going forward this year. You know, I'm founder and CEO of Fundraiser, which is a enterprise class crowdfunding platform, and we partner with Charity Village about bringing this really advanced technology to the charitable community in Canada. And it's not just the technology, but the idea of some of the leadership around the trends we're seeing, this kind of webinar to educate and hopefully help you with the hard challenges that you have ahead of you in this year and in general in fundraising for your charities. So really looking forward to this. As always, you know, think of your questions along the way. We will do our best to answer those questions at the end, or we'll get back to you with answers afterwards. So let her put us to the task. For today, one of the things that we thought we'd do, you know, our agenda for today, was go over some of the things that we've learned from last year. I'm taking a sec because the slide's taking a moment to change. So we want to talk about some observations that we had from 2020, particularly around how organizations were responding to the pandemic. And then we wanted to talk about 3 trends that we're seeing that are moving forward into 2021. And you know, to set the bar here, this isn't all about all the major trends. These are not necessarily all the most or biggest trends, but these are the trends that we think that you can react to and that you can actually have some sort of adaptation strategy or leverage that you can use off of them. So that was the focus in picking these items. Over the course of the year, we're going to continue to do more webinars like this, and we'll dig deeper into some of the other trends and some of the other issues to keep it moving for you. So we'll wait for a slide to update here. And it's taking its sweet time. There we go. Okay. So observations from 2020. I mean, we always say unprecedented times and all the different ways to describe this. Wow, what happened year. But one of the things that we saw happening in charities that were being successful in navigating through the pandemic, a lot of the trends came out around their response to it. One of the things that became very clear, we've known it for years, that relying on major events for funding our causes has some risks to it. You know, if you're running a golf tournament's rained out, you're running a gala and the hotel has to shut because of a kitchen fire, there's all sorts of things that can really disrupt your fundraising. And it took this year with the pandemic to really point out how dangerous some of the emphasis is on singular funding events or singular forms of fundraising. So it shows some strategic disadvantages in making sure the longevity of your organization, but also the practical ability to fund it through different seasons. One of the observations that we had is organizations that had some trust in their community. The ones that said, our donors are with us. We don't have to be in a very narrow band or pattern of behavior for them to want to support us. We're successful in pivoting their fundraising activities. You know, just because the donors came to the gala every year didn't mean they would be not interested in helping in other ways if there was a trust there that this is a good charity to work with. And so the ones that had the most trust were able to pivot their organization and do different things and have their community come along with them. And one part of that is that organizations that were already in a mindset of continuous innovation, they were looking at ways to change the funding that they did, the way they delivered their services, the way they communicated with their crowd, were better prepared for this pandemic because they were already used to the idea of that we need to to do something different all the time. And so this was just a bigger version of we need to do something different or differently. It's a different version of that, but it just scaled up version. And so the innovation mindset was important. Key thing that happened is that the organizations that were really successful used the pandemic as a catalyst for change. It was actually helpful. Some organizations thrived through this pandemic, where they had these models of trying to make change. There's an old saying that says, don't fix it if it ain't broke. But in that case, this no longer works, because we need, with the dynamic changes in our market that are coming through, we need to be more interested in actually maybe disrupting things that are already working to make them work better. So one of the first trends that we're looking at is the trend that we see revenue diversification activities and an emphasis and focus on year-round fundraising to reduce the risk during this year, because we're not through this pandemic yet by any stretch. These are the kind of the key trend, one of the key trends that we want to talk about. So we'll get another slide up here. One of the things about shifting over to a revenue diversification strategy is the idea that episodic fundraising or event-based fundraising produces very spiky revenue. I mean, if you go through and you get your gala, that's a major component of your funding in a year. That causes a lot of activity is directed to it, and if it goes wrong, or if something doesn't pan out with it, it really can have a major impact on your revenue. So we notice that with a lot of organizations that focus on event-based funding, you know, they may end up having a period in the year where they get their grants in. Then they run their peer-to-peer event. Then they have a gala. Then they have a golf tournament. Then they end up having a year-end fundraising blitz. And the revenue over the course of the year is quite spiky. A challenge with this is that it can be really hard to predict revenue growth. It starts to narrow the window for your organization about how much revenue you can bring in. And it makes it, you know, you're particularly vulnerable then to something like a major event failing or not getting a particular grant. Year-round fundraising, the goal of a shift towards year-round fundraising is to try and smooth this curve out, to fill in the holes in between with what ideally is recurring revenue, but may have to be repeating revenue. And we'll go into some of the difference of that. But once this kind of transition and this emphasis comes into play, you have much less dependence on your events. They don't become core funding activities. They become incremental activities for generating additional revenue and, very importantly, acquiring new donors to put into your digital donation community. So the function of them changes from only being a revenue generator to a feed your what we call the revenue generation cycle for your cause. The challenge in moving towards this kind of fundraising that sometimes makes people feel risky is that the line that you have of continuous fundraising may be below the level you need to get started. Like when you first get going on trying to do these recurring programs and this diversified funding, you can end up feeling like you're below water and you're not going to make it. But this is an investment. You have to move into this type of model and plan on having it happen for a long time, because it will build, and you know, you may need to plan on how you're going to get through that period, but it does build as you go forward. So if we take a look a little bit deeper at this type of slide, just get the slide up for you. One of the things that's important is you can see what we would look at as bubbles in here. Little bubbles around where different types of campaigns can start contributing to your revenue flow. For example, the concept of do-it-yourself campaigns, where members of your community may decide to help you by fundraising for you. It could be a corporate partner that does that, could be an individual who's going to, you know, bike across Canada for you and try and raise some money along the way. Those little activities are blips that can help increase your overall baseline. And your peer-to-peer campaign, showing an orange in there, is one that might have a bigger blip. It's bringing in additional revenue. If a sponsorship campaign is something that might be run by one of your corporate partners doing it for you, where they're providing matching dollars in some way. But the foundation underneath of it can be what we call a series of micro projects. And micro projects are where you're telling a small set of stories around the beneficiaries and have these run continuously, because the mechanism that they have continues to inspire donors to give regardless of what time of year it is. So I'll give you an example of that. And this is one particularly interesting. This is from a group called Nausea. Nausea takes animals in Afghanistan that were befriended or rescued by soldiers that were there. And this is an American example, but it's a global example. They have used the concept of micro projects to help raise money for each of the animals that needs to be repatriated into the US. So they'll go and they find the animal that has been bonded with a soldier. They'll go to their community to raise money for that particular project, and they run hundreds of these campaigns a year. Rather than trying to support their overall operation, they talk about the individual animals and the individual soldiers and the benefits of that. So I won't read the entire slide, but really one of the things that comes out of this is by focusing on a much smaller project, donors feel like they make a much bigger difference. Their small contribution, you know, $100 contribution to the $3,000 campaign to get Pichot back from Afghanistan, feels like, as a donor, I feel like I made a big difference, especially when the communication around that can be so specific. One of the challenges with this model, most charities, when we first introduced this, say, yeah, but this won't work for my cause. I have no way I can do this. I mean, babies and puppy dogs, those are all easy to fund. But there's actually, usually for most causes, a micro project story that works. It just takes some creativity around what you're doing and digging in to why people give to your cause and who are the beneficiaries of your funding. That might make sense. So I'm going to show you another example just to kind of make it quite a bit wackier. If our slide will refresh, there's a group called Commemorative Air Force who uses this micro projects model to fund the restoration of old warplanes. And this was a campaign they ran recently through late November through to the end of the year, where they have what they call their 12 planes of Christmas, but it's actually designed to continue on through the rest of the year. They have one main overall campaign where they're talking about all the different aircraft, and then they have one campaign specifically for each of the planes that they're looking to support. So this is an example of where they broke up their work into the different projects that they were working on. This can be the same kind of technique that you can look at for how you would break up your work. Perhaps this is about different classrooms that you're supporting with your program. Perhaps this is about different programs itself. You're operating an access program for people with disabilities. Those individual programs can be a micro project. So one of the things that we try and help out with at any point, if someone says, what's my micro project, we're happy to talk with you about that and explain it, because the power of this model starts into the idea that you end up getting donors who are willing to give to you multiple times within a year to support projects that they're very interested in, and that you can directly communicate the impact to increase their loyalty around supporting that project. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this in one of the next trends. And just one quick note before we move on from that, one of the things that many people feel is a restriction on being able to do this is privacy concern. They can't talk about the beneficiaries that they're working with. And there are some techniques for dealing with that and still having this microprojects model working. So please don't consider that that is a restrictive thing. It doesn't actually hurt. The next thing to think about in this is one of the ways to help get more support from your community and fill in those revenue gaps is to getting your community to do it yourself fundraising for you. And this is where your advocates can create a campaign on your behalf and raise money from their own community, advertising it out through their own social media networks, which brings you hopefully net new donors and increases your available supportive community pool. The trick is the technology can make this substantially simpler for you. For someone to do something like share their birthday, give up their birthday for your cause. Or, you know, we have a lot of people that on Cancer Day might be raising money because they've had cancer. Or they may end up doing this for you because they've been a beneficiary of your service in some way. They've somehow had help from you, or your family members had help from you, and they want to kind of pay it back by raising money. Really important to this is that the flow of getting this set up has to be very, very simple and has to be very low maintenance on your part in order for you to want to do it. And it also has to give you the control of your brand messaging and things like tax receipt distribution, stewardship of the funds, making sure the funds come to you and that kind of thing. But the more you get this going, I mean, there are birthdays all year long, and people are willing to give up their birthdays for your cause. You can reduce your dependence on some of the seasonality that comes in and smooth out that revenue curve. So some points on guidance for the year. In this trend of revenue diversification and focus on year-long fundraising, the things that we think would be important for you to look at, and come on slide, change over, thank you. Some do's and don'ts. A big thing in this is that with all the galas and things like that that were replaced this year, you have a revenue hole and you're looking to fill it. Don't expect that an offline event, going and just doing a virtual gala, will have the equivalent success of your online event. It might. It would be great if it does. But frequently that transition from that offline event to an online event is quite difficult. And it takes a while, especially with some of your older donors or your less digital donors. They are going to have some trouble moving forward. The good news out of the pandemic is that it's forced a lot of these people who were not interested in doing things digitally. Now they've had to. They've ordered food online. They've had it delivered. They may have shopped online where they hadn't done that before. So they're more willing to interact with you online. So because of that, do brainstorm 2 or 3 different kinds of non-episodic, non-seasonal, non-traditional fundraising events. Find different ways that you might be able to do some work to get your community to move forward. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment around innovation and how you would apply innovation to your group. A big thing is because many of your donors may be coming over, they're new digital donors, it's important to not overcomplicate things. There's been some work on taking offline events, making them online virtual events like walks and rides and runs. And sometimes in the process of doing that, we've seen clients that are trying too hard to be splashy, to be innovative in the way they're using some of the tools. And so, for example, they may end up doing a virtual run and they've got this mobile app that they're trying to put into it, and it has all this interaction that they want to have people do. And some of the digital donors are going, whoa, I can barely figure out how to log in, let alone, what's this thing about tweeting? So be careful and not overcomplicate the story to keep your digital donors from getting confused. It doesn't mean that you can't segment and target new groups of people using that, but just be aware of the audience that you're trying to bring forward on some of your events. And that segmentation is a really important technique we'll talk in a sec. Big thing though that we saw coming out of last year was using impact stories and impact communication tools in deciding or defining your fundraising messages. You know, give you an example of the story that early in the pandemic, Vancouver Sun Children's Fund who normally run a program to feed children who are hungry inside schools. It's a school lunch program. When the pandemic hit, what are we going to do? No kids are in school. We're all in lockdown mode. Are we even needed anymore? And they quickly looked around at what was going on with the beneficiaries, the recipients. And they talked to the principals in the schools, and they realized that this need was still there and that they could respond to it. So the principals got innovative and figured out ways that kids who were still hungry could get to the schools safely, spread out over time, so that there was no stigma attached with having to go and get some help. And they were able to run these programs in a different form. Vancouver Sun talked about the impact of the donations that they were starting to get in their COVID campaign immediately back to the community. They were able to they raised $100,000 and some odd in the first few weeks of their campaign, and then immediately communicated back to the donors, this is how we've deployed that money right away. And that campaign shot up over the next couple of months to around $985,000 from a program that they thought they were never going to need again. So the point is that impact communication piece can be really powerful because the community right now is looking for answers to solve the problems of this pandemic, and they want to react to it pretty quickly. So encouragement there, use the impact stories. One of the things that comes out of that, and this is a change that some people are experiencing now, where before, when we were using mail outs to our donor base, we would restrict the number of times we do that during the year because of costs and because of the worry of overwhelming the donors with information. The nice thing about the digital communications is that the donors can help self-regulate how much information they're getting if it's properly broken into chunks. So one of our guidances is increase the frequency of communication with your donors via your social channels by telling them stories of the impact. Small little day-to-day bits of what you're doing can help personalize and tell the story of how your cause is working in this time frame. And that is having a strong effect that we've observed on donor loyalty and donor participation. On the same token, strengthen your sponsorships with your relationships with your sponsors this year. Corporations are also scanning the horizon, looking for ways that they can contribute back to their communities. And we found some very interesting partnerships are coming out where corporations are saying, look, for this year, we really need to focus on local giving, for example. And we want to make sure that projects in our community and our employees and their friends and neighbors are being taken care of. So they're investing their own money in doing that. And it's not your traditional sponsorship request. They're not saying, hey, put my name up on your gala and we're just there. They're more interested in actively promoting what they're doing with you. So take advantage of it. And then the little plug here, leverage digital fundraising technology because it helps make you more efficient and effective in delivering on some of these programs. Okay. This is a big topic that we've seen coming forward from last year and into this year, and it really speaks to the kind of the change in the way we communicate digitally. We're seeing a shift from broadcasting to narrowcasting. And so what do we mean by that? Most people are familiar with the idea of broadcasting. We're transmitting one message to a large group of people, not particularly worried about the specific audiences within that group. The goal is to get to as many people as possible with a message. And as a result, that message tends to be fairly generic about the cause because we don't know exactly who's paying attention. Narrowcasting is the opposite, where we're taking a very specific message and we're communicating it to only a very select small group of people. We're segmenting the group that we're trying to talk with and giving them a very specific message. And the reason this matters in this year is there's a number of reasons for it, but one of them is really the idea of our societal trends. We are having a tremendous competition for our attention, you know, from media, from brands that are trying to advertise on social media and online, from other charities who are trying to promote their own projects, from celebrity, from all the political mess that was going on. There's a ton of things that are competing for our attention. And the marketplace is noisier than it's ever been. This online space, now that everyone has had to take and focus on trying to get online, there's many more voices trying to get heard. And we're fighting for a very, very finite resource, our attention. We only have so much time in a day, only so many things that we're going to be interested in listening to. So trying to get to this group is, it's very important that the message is finally tailored. A broadcasting message is somewhat too generic to get attention anymore. People are looking to learn more about exactly what their interest is, the results of their fundraising are, in order to keep their attention. And this is where, if we combine the ideas of the micro projects and the idea of narrowcasting, if you think back to the Warplanes example, the 12 Planes of Christmas, one of their small projects is doing this in a great way that I thought worth mentioning here. They have one of their training planes that was called Rosie, and it was about, this plane is, they're trying to restore it. The group behind it is telling the story as a micro project about the aircraft. And you're going, well, that's not particularly all that interesting. To some people it is, but to many people it isn't. So what they're doing is they're telling the story in relationship to the women that worked on these planes or did the flight training for those that went off to war. So that's an example of a photo there that was actually taken at one of the construction plants for the aircraft in the war. The point about telling the story of the women behind this is that it's a much more engaging way to talk to the community, and the funds that are coming in are related to how that's making this story of this history come alive. So by, in the overall 12 Planes of Christmas project, if you're very interested in bombers, this story about this trainer won't matter to you. And if everyone's broadcast the information about what's happening with one of the bomber planes, you might get a lot of people unsubscribing over a while because it doesn't match their interest. But with the segmentation capabilities of crowdfunding platforms, you can tell this specific story, a deep story about this particular project to all the people who have donated to it or subscribed to it, simply by posting an update on the campaign page, and all those people are updated. So it saves you a lot of work in doing this. So our guidance around narrowcasting versus broadcasting and the trend here is it makes a change in your storytelling. And the storytelling now comes from talking more about your cause generically to trying to, I mean, a lot of the times we want to say, hey, this is the good work we're doing, and that's important. But making the donor the hero of your projects, especially when they're broken up into small projects like this, really helps increase their engagement, their willingness to give multiple times, and their loyalty to the project. So do break your story down into smaller segments. If you can, micro projects, but if you can't, small areas where you can help communicate the impact of the donor in a meaningful way to them. And do communicate more frequently about those donor impacts, because in this year where you're now getting this attention, it's helping you build loyalty. What we saw at the end of last year was the fact that organizations who were more innovative were actually thriving in the pandemic because they had used it as a catalyst for changing their behavior and being able to address the audience that you have that is looking for solutions. Now, this number is from the US, that they estimated in December that there were 50,000 jobs lost in the nonprofit sector in the United States. If we apply our traditional 10% of that as the Canadian market, which would be somewhat adjusted for some of the rescue programs, the CERB programs, and things like that that were done, we're still looking at maybe losing 5,000 jobs in the sector in the month of December alone. So why does this matter? Well, it means that you're getting asked to do more in a more complicated time frame than ever before with fewer resources at your fingertips. You're having to carry, like this little ant, you're having to carry a much bigger load than normal. This is why innovation at this point, we have to do things differently. We can't just pile on another brick onto your load and help you carry that much further. It's not going to work. You're going to be exhausted. So one of the things that we need to do is innovate towards this particular topic and see what else we can do within the organization to change it. The question we get sometimes is, how do you innovate if you're a charity? I mean, we're looking at these problems and we're not familiar with the mechanism. We've been doing this a very long time. It usually starts with bringing an innovation culture to your team. You know, one of the points about that is you want to try new ideas, and new ideas bring with them risks. So you have to have a willingness to try something and have it fail. Now, the goal is not to make a huge, big project that you're going to bet everything on. It's quite the opposite. In order to innovate, the best forms of innovation, and we certainly learn this in the software business when we're starting up businesses from scratch, is we want to try and do a whole series of small experiments, little things that have low cost and low risk, because it lets us taste test a new concept. Hey, would this work? So we take a small segment of donors, we take a small project, we try and communicate about it differently and see if we can run something different and then measure the results. Did it work? How could we improve it? And frequently you want to leverage technology to help you do this because it can help on the organization and the reporting aspects. So going forward on that, you know, we think there's some guidance around innovation you're going to need. And we'll wait for the slide. Okay, so figure out where you're going to need help and guidance. And there's lots of topics for it. We'll go into some of them in a sec. And figure out what are the most important strategy points you need to get answers for, feedback from this year. And then for this particular part around innovation is start talking to the community around you about it. Socialize your request. Ask your network, ask your board, ask your donors. Yeah, your donors. In social media, if they're professionals out there, if you're trying to figure out a digital marketing problem, your community of donors may have very specific techniques and that they're more than willing to give you because they already care about you as a cause. So if you publish your requests and just be transparent around it, and everybody goes, just be transparent. But it's no harm to say, hey, we're looking for some expertise in our lovely community to help us understand how to do this better. That's a very, very helpful thing to do. Here's some areas where you may need some extra advice. You know, asking about digital marketing. Your community has that. Social fundraising, they're on social, no. This is where you can also find partners by putting out to your community. We're looking for a partner to help us with. You know, storytelling expertise. There's a lot of people with writing as a hobby or a semi-professional part of the world that may want to talk to you about how do you write stories for social media and who might take it on for you to help with your community building that community of supporters. So there's a lot of different things that can be done there. And we talk about using the technology. You know, if you're thinking of innovative projects, if you take a look at this diagram, the Charity Village crowdfunding platform does all these different kinds of projects. And these are some things that you can experiment with to try and see if you can diversify your fundraising. And a great part about this is that there's no cost to this. There's no cost to use the platform to sign up. And there's a great free option for helping use it to actually run your cause. So there's, you know, if you're running a DIY event or something like this, or a peer-to-peer event, this is a very, very good, advanced, and low-cost option for getting that to happen for you. And one of the things that comes out of this, and this is one of the reasons why Fundraiser and Charity Village have partnered on this, is we're here to help not just be a technology provider, We're here to help you with your strategy and crowdfunding techniques. How do you translate the story of your cause into a crowdfunding mechanism? So if you're needing help on this, if you type SOS into the chat box, or if you come back to us later and we can work with you and answer some of these questions about how-tos, how to apply it. And that's not about a sales pitch. And some of you on the call here, I expect have already been through a session like this. We're really trying to dig in to understand your charity and how we can help and how crowdfunding might translate for you. So we've had a lot of fun in some of the sessions figuring out what the micro projects are for some people, for example, and how to use crowdfunding. So with that, I'd like to kind of open it up for questions and see if there's anything we can help you with on the line here.
That's great, Daryl. Thank you. So I've just also reiterated your message in the chat box. So yes, please do feel free to type the SOS. And we will follow up with you about booking a coaching session. And we will have a link to book a session as well in the email that you get later today, if you'd rather wait for that. So jumping right into questions, Daryl, can you explain a little bit more about the Do-It-Yourself campaign that you referenced at the beginning? We had a few questions about what that actually looks like in practice.
Sure. With the Do-It-Yourself campaign, basically the crowdfunding platform gets plugged into your website with the idea of either a landing page or, well, typically it's a landing page that's provided by the platform that explains how the Do-It-Yourself program works to your community of supporters. And then there's an option for them to register to start to fundraise for you. It takes them through a campaign creation process where some of the content about your cause is auto-populated. So they don't have to tell your story. They really only have to tell the story of why they're supporting you. And they can do that with photos and videos and their own text. That campaign is then submitted to you for approval by email. There's an email comes through, says, check this one out. If you're okay with it, accept it, and it will launch. And at that point, those fundraisers are able to go out into the community, promote their own campaign, solicit it from their friends and family, and the money flows directly into the nonprofit's payment account with Stripe or PayPal. And if you had it set up, the platform will issue a tax receipt for you from your own charitable member, and in a nice format. It's actually a mail merge type format to create your tax receipt. So the thank you letter that goes out can look really good. But the nice part about this is that as the platform, as the charity, you can continue to monitor all these campaigns. You can even go in and edit the content if you need to. If someone's saying something that's a little off or a little inappropriate, you can monitor and change this or delete the social media comments if people are saying inappropriate things. So it still gives you control, but it gives you leverage for the people that want to help you in the community. And it's worked out really well for a lot of organizations.
Well, that's helpful, Daryl. And that kind of leads into another interesting question about who owns the data that's on, the crowdfunding site and the campaigns.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So we're not Facebook. We own the donors and own the data and sometimes share it with you. This data is your donor data, and it is accessible to you regardless if it's a peer-to-peer campaign, DIY campaign, a microprojects campaign. All this data is accessible to you all the time. You can access it and view it online, or you can download it and put it, take it back into your existing donor database. And there's some ways to automatically push that over to your donor database if you're using Salesforce and things like that. There's import tools for Blackbaud, but the data is yours. And as a platform, we do not market to these people. We do not sell advertising. We do not sell the data. So it's there, and you can, thousands of charities are safely trusting us with that donor data because they have access to it all the time.
Great, thank you for clarifying that. So another question about microprojects. Is the income that comes in from microprojects restricted?
Great one. It sometimes is and sometimes isn't. So how's that for a waffly answer? The way to do it, there's a part of the donor data collection that is done prior to checkout. Is best practice on this is to put in a checkbox that says, you know, use this for this specific project, or at the discretion of the executive, use it for the most need in the organization. If that's checked, then it is not unrestricted funding. And that's just a common technique that seems to be very acceptable to donors. I mean, they understand that they're trying to support a particular project. If they're adamant that's the only one they'll support, they uncheck the box. But this, generally, you can use microprojects to be an unrestricted funding mechanism. Same thing with most crowdfunding.
Great. And I want to jump back to the do-it-yourself campaigns for just a second, because I have another great question just for clarification. Sherry Lynn asks, do-it-yourself campaigns sound like traditional third-party campaigns. Is this true?
Yes. Yeah. It's just a different. We're trying to get some standard terminology in the industry, and it's DIY or third party. So thanks for catching it.
Awesome. And then in terms of the, you know, we're talking a little bit about unrestricted income, and, you know, some folks have pointed out that events often bring in a lot of unrestricted income for organizations. Are there ways that organizations have managed to set up micro projects to fund admin costs that maybe aren't so compelling and are a little bit difficult to get donors to contribute to?
Yeah, it's a very interesting philosophical approach to it. One of the things that we've noticed in micro projects is that you can communicate more about what the real cost of supporting a beneficiary is. And as a result, then there can be kind of a loaded cost that comes into when they're making a contribution. You can talk about how much of that goes to support the project. There are some other techniques that are probably the topic of an entire webinar at some point, or discussion certainly, on how you can have more of the overhead elements that you have that you require funding for paid for by the community, so that it looks like you're actually reducing your overhead because it is specifically funded. So for example, one of the groups has used a project for helping outfit their offices with PPE and some of the additional activities that they need to do during COVID. So these are not directly benefiting the mission, but the crowd was understanding that, hey, we want those people. I mean, in this case, it was a public-facing charity, so they were having to deal with the public all the time to make sure that the workers in that charity were well protected. And so they were helping make sure they had PPE, they had cleaning supplies, they had, you know, some of the panels that were put up to do the separation, things like that. Those types of things are technically an overhead funding, and that's a great thing. You wouldn't necessarily use a micro project for that. You could just use a crowdfunding campaign for that. But in doing that, this is where we didn't talk a whole lot about that this time, but using what they call rewards or incentives functionality. And a wish list is an item. If you think Kickstarter, where you get something back from the campaign, we've adapted that for charitable giving with the idea of a wish list or a charity storefront. And so one of the things you could give to is someone could give to say, hey, I will buy them a PPE pack for every employee. You know, one pack costs this much money. You can show that as a wish on the crowdfunding campaign, where someone can grant the wish to protect one of the employees. And by doing it that way, you're really communicating the impact as part of making the contribution. It makes it much simpler. So we had a cause out of Nova Scotia that did this for all of their residents in their facility, where they were giving them different aspects that they needed over the Christmas holidays, including some clothing, including food, things like that, by granting wishes like this. And that mechanism really helped cover some of the overhead, as well as show the direct benefits to the recipients.
Wonderful. Okay, so moving along. Is there a risk of donor fatigue over the year when you're doing this kind of emphasis on year-round fundraising rather than sort of building excitement for just a few events?
Yes and no. So the one of the challenges with asking a whole bunch for giving is that we could fatigue out the donor. One of the benefits of narrowcasting is that we actually stop asking. We just start doing a show and tell. So the difference in the communication style is that everything that goes out is not a request. It's quite the opposite. You're typically trying to just say what the existing money has been used for. And in doing this, you can inspire people to give more often. I did a TEDx talk on philanthropy as entertainment a little over a year ago at the University of Northern British Columbia. And the premise of the talk is that if we want to get people to give more, we're better. Research shows, Gates Foundation did research, said we're better to ask for a lot less, but ask for it much more often. When we had the restrictions of we could only mail out a couple of times a year, we tried to focus on building that excitement at the end and ending up with maximizing the size of the gift we could get, because it was only a certain amount of times that we could talk to that donor. With digital fundraising, it's the opposite. Our best bet is actually to try and get them to give repeatedly small amounts, and then telling them how those small amounts made a difference, because it's much more of a discretionary spend at that point. And we get rewarded in our body with the feel-good feeling from all the serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin hormones that are released when we make a gift. It actually becomes more addictive. So funny enough, by asking more often, you can reduce donor fatigue as long as you're continuing to tell them the impact, because your donor is really buying the result. And when you tell them what that result is, if they feel they got a good deal, they'll buy again.
Great. So really, we're talking about stewardship there, Daryl.
Yeah, and in a more automated way, because we have to do it in a highly efficient way. We have fewer people do this year, and we have a bigger problem to communicate. It takes a bit of a mindset shift in the way you look at talking with your community. But what we've seen in groups that are doing it is that they're surprised at, frankly, it usually is a little slow to get going. It takes a while to get into it. But then once you get it going, it really works. We had a group that was worked with families that had children with severe illnesses, and they were using the microprojects model. And over the course of a couple of years, they ended up with what they called their army of supporters who would give $5 a week or $10 a week to the project of the week that they were doing with a microproject. But this is, raising $40,000 a week for one of these projects over the course of that period. The donors were actually saying, hey, how come I didn't see the project last week? The executive director took a week off, and the donors were complaining, hey, I didn't get my chance to give. What a lovely, lovely problem to have.
Wow, is that ever? I can think of a lot of charities that would like to have that problem. So Daryl, kind of, I guess that this question from Taylor connects well with what you're talking about there in the example. Taylor asks, for a large campaign, what are the best tools to use? Because you want to make it relatable, like your example with the dogs and the soldiers, but also you need a large sum of donations. Would it make sense to share multiple stories and ideas to raise funds, or does this make it too confusing?
Yeah, so a couple of different strategies you can do. If you can break a large project into small projects, highly recommend it, because the donor feels like they're making a bigger impact when they give you a traditional sized gift. If I give you $100 to a $1 million project, it's a lot different than $100 to a $100 million project. But the other part of that is that if you have a project, can it break up into phases? So the first phase is this much, and when you get to that phase, you've accomplished that goal, communicating to everyone what the money is already done to get you to that goal and what the next set of funds would be used for. So the story suddenly shifts into a next phase and why it would be important. And then you can continue that phasing approach a number of times. Or if you have multiple beneficiaries that are going to benefit from a campaign, but you want to tie them all together in one campaign, you tell the story sequentially, so that you tell the story of one beneficiary group, and then you start telling the story of the second beneficiary group. You can relate back to, compare and contrast stuff. Just like we did for beneficiary group A, this is what we're doing with group B. And if you've been telling the story of what that money was used for all the way along, that second group can find it easier to fund. And that's a little bit what happened with Vancouver Sun. They had the first segment of their COVID campaign when they started to talk about the way the funds were being used and the benefits it was having right away. People started to want to fund phase 2 and phase 3 really rapidly. They were astounded at the response that they got. And to put it in context, they doubled the amount. We talk about charities that have done very well through the pandemic. They doubled the amount of funding that they got this year in the pandemic year. They funded the regular program, exceeded what they normally did, plus they had this $850,000 bonus COVID campaign that they did.
Great success story. So just want to clarify, because a few people have asked this, and I'm sure it's on a lot of people's minds. Crowdfunding is open to nonprofits and charities. You don't have to have charitable registration or be able to issue tax receipts to use the crowdfunding platform, correct?
That's correct.
Excellent. So just wanted to make that clear for everyone in case you were wondering.
And social enterprises. So there's, it's actually open to businesses as well, but in a charitable context, you have to look at that. Give you an example of that in the business context. Nature's Path Foods did a program this year where they called it Eat Well, Do Good, and they supported 12 food banks across Canada and the US with a program that was run by the corporation, fundraising on behalf of these charities. So, it can be used by corporate partners as well. And that really helps when you get the corporation comes to you and says, hey, our employees want to really help. How can we do that? Crowdfunding is a great way to do that.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about growing community. Now, I've put an article into the chat box for folks that have been asking about this, about building community. We've had a couple of questions about, organizations that maybe don't have a lot of followers on social media. They maybe have a modest newsletter subscription. Where do they start building an audience for crowdfunding and for micro projects?
Yeah, there's kind of a path towards this that we call build a community, buy a community, or borrow a community. So you're building a community through your organic efforts at outreach. When you've got someone coming through to you, you're able to add them to your lists, and you hopefully can build a longer-term relationship with them. The nice thing about crowdfunding and its social media presence is that you can start to use this to borrow a community. Now, the idea of borrowing a community is if you have an influencer in some fashion who's willing to talk about your cause, be it a celebrity, be it a local news organization, be it a corporate partner who has picked you and sponsors you, but are willing to talk about the good work you do because it makes them look good to their community, they can bring you a lot more visitors to your cause. And if your story is compelling when they hit that page, they're more likely to convert and become at least a trial donor. So the goal is to get them engaged with you as a cause in a very small way. And over time, stewardship them into a larger presence. But that idea of borrowing is a really important one because it is a low-cost ask for a lot of influencers. If you're doing good work and they like you, they sometimes really like to talk about you because it gives their community content. And it's good for the brand or the image of the person who's promoting it, as well as for the community members. So borrowing a crowd is probably one of the most powerful ways to kickstart your initial community building. The other, basically in there is you can ask your existing donors to share your stuff and give them some specific content about the results that they have generated for you. Sharing that into their community is one of the finest forms of endorsement you can have. They've said, hey, I gave money to this cause, and together we did this. Back to that idea of making them the hero of the story. You're saying they're the catalyst that helped cause this cycle to be completed, that it was needed in order for it to work. You know, the charity had the nonprofit had the capabilities of doing this, and the donor has the financial resources to help make it happen. So that was a key piece of the puzzle. They're now the hero of the story, and when they are the hero of the story, they're more willing to share the good work out into the community, and as a result, that'll attract other people who also, first off, you know, admire or appreciate this person, but also want to be more feeling they're making an impact, and that can help build that part of the community. And the last part is to buy a community. And the way you buy a community is by social media and other advertising, targeting groups through social media. The nice thing about social media is you can target people with similar interests. So if you know your existing audience and what's interesting to them, where they hang out on social media are good places to start participating, either through just joining the groups that are there and hopefully participating in the conversation, because a lot of social media is assumed to be a broadcast mechanism. It's actually a conversation mechanism. It's the way you talk with your community about the work that's going on and the work that you're doing and what they're enabling you to do. But then you can also do some ads. And with the crowdfunding platform technology, you can track the effectiveness of the ad and see which ads are converting, which ads are bringing people to you, what kind of traffic they have.
Great. Well, Daryl, thank you.
Answer, but, it's a big topic.
No, it is a big topic. I think we could do a whole other webinar just on that one.
Yeah.
It's a big one.
Yeah.
Well, I see we're coming up on the hour, so I think we're going to hold questions there. Thank you again, Daryl. It's been, as always, a very informative presentation. You also always manage to make our conversations about fundraising inspiring and reassuring as well. Did you have any final comments before we sign off today?
Just encouragement for everybody. This is a year we can do something bigger and better. This pandemic has inspired a lot of people to do things, to try harder, basically. And I think that we're at a really good time to leverage that to our advantage and grow the missions, because it's never been more important. So looking forward to helping you, and please let us know how we can help.
Well, that's great. So I just will remind everyone before we sign off today that you will receive a follow-up email later today with a link to the webinar recording. Please do feel free to share that link with your colleagues as well. It's open to everyone. The email will also include a survey link that you can fill out with your feedback on today's webinar, as well as additional information about topics you'd like to see covered in the future. You can also leave your name and contact information if you'd like us to follow up with you about crowdfunding or about the webinar or anything else. We'll have information in that email about the crowdfunding services that Daryl referenced today, so that you can go ahead and get a campaign set up to start fundraising for free right away. But there will also be information on how to book one of the 15-minute coaching sessions to finalize your campaign, which Daryl referenced today. And for all of those of you who typed SOS in the chat box, we will follow up with you. And for those that didn't, now's your last chance to get that in. So if you want to get one of those coaching sessions, either SOS in the chat box or fill out the form that you'll get by email later today. So on behalf of everyone at Charity Village, thank you again for taking the time to join us today. We do have a lot of webinars planned for you between now and the spring, including our next session on February 18th that will help you learn how to build trust and better connect with people online through virtual meetings. This is proving also to be a very popular session, so look for registration in the email we send you later today. Thanks again for taking part in today's webinar. I wish you all a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.